Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, you're asleep. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Doesn't sound like a PR audience. Some of you studied engineering, architecture, IT. So I'm going to introduce you first. I'm welcoming you to the quarterly PRISA Media Networking Breakfast. I'll start by thanking AMEC, and the representative of AMEC is Francois Van Dijk, and they have sponsored us to the tune of over 140,000 rands. Can we give them a round of applause? The value of the presentation around the Barcelona Principles is very high, and they were kind enough to provide this to us as a courtesy and just as a show of generosity towards PRISA. And I think we'll continue to reciprocate that relationship and that token of gratitude. Thank you very much. Secondly, before we start, I just wanted to congratulate the lady who's next to me, Zianda Ngobo, who was a student last week. She's still a student today, but now she's also a celebrity. She delivered the first PRISA news bulletin, and she won the PRISA Presenter Search competition. She's 19 years old, studying public relations and communication at the University of Johannesburg, and she's giving even ENCA journalists a run for her money in the way she presents news. So let's give her a round of applause. So we will start this session by playing her news bulletin, and then we will take it from there. Then we will introduce our first speaker.
Measurable Mondli Gungubele is set to launch the MEC Charter Council. PRISA launches a new website. PRISA endorses the curricula of the Independent Institute of Education and Beria Technical College. The deadline to enter the 2022 PRISM Awards has been extended. PRISA has moved to new premises in Rosebank. Good day, this is PRISA News and I am Zianda Ngobo. The president of PRISA, Tebogo Ditshego, has announced that PRISA will host its quarterly media networking breakfast on Friday, 18 March 2022 from 8:30 in the morning. This event will be hosted at the WeWork Office Park in Rosebank, next to Rosebank Mall. At the PRISA quarterly media networking breakfast, PRISA members will be provided with an update on new member benefits, the 2022 PRISM Awards, and presentation from industry experts about ethical public relations with the rise of social media, newsworthy stories in the African context, how relationships between public relations practitioners and journalists can be nurtured, and the Barcelona Principles as a measurement tool for communication campaigns. This event is open for registered PRISA members. So, to RSVP, please send an email to president@prisa.co.za and indicate if you'll be attending in person or online. The Minister in the Presidency, Honorable Mondli Gungubele, is scheduled to launch the Marketing, Advertising and Communication Charter Council on the 25th of March. This highly anticipated launch will include an announcement of the appointed council members who will be responsible for the functioning of the Marketing, Advertising and Communication Charter Council and to develop the sector code that will drive this critical sector. For information about media RSVPs, please visit www.prisa.co.za and click on PRISA News. PRISA management is proud to announce that a new website has been developed that now lists all registered individuals, consultancies, and corporate members of PRISA. The new website has a more modern design with new features that make it simpler for members to access information. A members-only login feature has been added to connect our stakeholders to pertinent research and resources that will enable the sector to uphold best industry practices. Furthermore, the website includes an e-commerce feature where members can register or renew their membership and pay online. To visit PRISA's new website, visit www.prisa.co.za. We are proud to announce that the Public Relations and Communication-related curricula of the Independent Institute of Education and the Beria Technical College have been endorsed by PRISA after a thorough assessment. This is a great achievement from the IIE and Berry Technical College, as it means that their public relations and communication related courses meet the standard of excellence required to produce graduates who will excel in the industry. PRISA has also included a section in our new website with a list of all the tertiary institutions whose public relations and communication related courses have been endorsed by PRISA. PRISA is excited to announce that the new coordinating committee has decided to extend the deadline for the entries of the PRISM Awards to Friday, 18 March 2022. For more information about how to enter the PRISM Awards, please visit www.prism-awards.co.za or email louise@prisa.co.za. In a move that will make PRISA more accessible and enable PRISA to deliver enhanced value for our members, PRISA has relocated its offices to Rosebank at the WeWork Office Park next to Rosebank Mall on 173 Oxford Road. These facilities are more centrally located for public transport and will provide an enhanced continuous training and development experience for our members. For more information about the continuous training and development services PRISA has to offer, please visit www.prisa.co.za and click on Training or Workshops. That's all from me, Ziyanda Ngobo, a public relations and communication student at the University of Johannesburg. This is a historic day as I'm the host of the first ever episode of PRISA News in its 65-year history. I'm excited to be part of the history of an institution with such a rich heritage. I wish you a great day further and a meaningful Human Rights Month. Goodbye.
So I'll tell you a story about Ziyanda. Something that she doesn't know, that her mom sent me a DM. And she said, thank you very much to PRISA for giving her an opportunity, for believing in my daughter. And I'm just so proud of what my daughter has achieved. And at the age of 19, for you to do the news bulletin of a 65-year-old organization is just a sentiment of what is possible if you are committed, if you see opportunities and you grab them with both hands. And we're very proud of you. Ziyanda came to the actual production. She was dressed to the nines, very professional, very punctual, very respectful, but also just being herself. She wasn't too stiff. And as we took her through the paces, she also learned very quickly. I'm just sending out a hint, because if you're not going to hire her, then she won't be on the market for that long. So I suggest that you take her numbers. She's available for internship opportunities, and we have many other young students here who are available. I'm just requesting that let's reach out to them, let's speak to them, and let's see what opportunities they have. But let's give her one more round of applause. So we're going to, without further ado, what we'd like to say is a lot of the legislation around sectors that where you need to be registered as a professional member, they require you to be registered with a professional body and be bound by code of ethics and best practices. And the reason architects and people who do engineering and people who do other practices that are life and death, like being a doctor, the reason you have to be registered is because it's life and death. Now, we saw with the pandemic that actually communication is also life and death. Because if you don't have information, you won't be able to respond accordingly to what is happening in society. And also knowing how to navigate through misinformation is very important, because you have, for example, vaccine hesitancy. You have a lot of conspiracy theories that are going around. And it's very important for you to not only have the communication tools to talk, but to learn how to listen, to learn how to research, and to learn how to work through information. And so our profession is a life and death profession. It's a profession that kills and makes companies. It's a profession that kills and makes relationships. And in society, we've seen it through the pandemic that communication is essential for society. It's the glue that binds our relationships together. And it is very important for us to be professional communicators. So I will appeal to those who have joined us who are not members of PRISA, but who are in public relations related fields, to join PRISA. It's not expensive. And the first benefit is that you get a professional designation that is recognized by SAQA. And these are NQF levels from 6 to 8. And you would be abiding by the professional standards. But I think more importantly, we need to work towards our sector being more respected. It can't be that a communicator is just someone maybe who looks cute or who sounds good. It needs to be someone who's really good at communicating. And communicating is a very complicated process. And it must be professionalized. So we appeal to you to take responsibility for this industry, for this sector, and join PRISA. We will be working with a government to ensure that over the next 5 years, we look into legislation and policy that'll make it compulsory for professionals in communication and public relations to be registered with a professional body if they want to work with government. And I think that also needs to go into the private sector. Once our industry is better respected, we are able to do our work better. We are able to unlock opportunities for people who are really trained in the profession, and that we work with credible people who really know what they're doing. But if we have people who are not credible working in our industry, then you get those instances of Bell Pottinger where we are really dragged through the mud and disrespected. And so we need to change this stereotype around PR as people who are just sugarcoating information to people who are providing an essential service, which is communication. So let's take personal responsibility for that. At the end of the session, I'll take you through the other benefits of joining PRISA. But I think the first thing is we must take personal responsibility and join PRISA, renew our membership, participate in the PRISM Awards, get continuous training and development, and really be a part of growing our industry and professionalizing our industry. Are we together? Thank you very much. So I will call on Francois van Dijk, who is the Regional Chair of AMEC of Africa and the Middle East. His presentation that he's going to give you is very critical because we're moving away from AVEs to the Barcelona Principles. He's going to take you through how do you use the Barcelona Principles as a measurement tool. And as he walks onto the stage, I really want us to give him a warm welcome because it is a lot of sacrifice. He actually agreed to come at the last minute. He has so many meetings scheduled for today. So let's appreciate the sacrifice and let's really get into the presentation. Francois, over to you.
Thank you for those kind words, Tebogo. He's given me a very challenging task today, and that's to talk about the Barcelona Principles. Not talking about it, but talking about it for 30 minutes, which is very difficult. I can talk about it for days. So before we start, I'm going to ask you a quick question. How do you measure a snake? In inches, they don't have feet. And that's why my career as a stand-up comic didn't last very long, and I dabble in measurement. So in my real life, I run operations at Unico, excuse me, which is a media and brand intelligence company. I've been serving on the AMEC board as an international director for the last few years. I play around with the IIB and their measurement council. And then from this year, I'm the inaugural chair of the Africa and Middle East chapter for AMEC, which has always been unrepresented on the global stage. You may ask, who's AMEC? Well, they created the Barcelona Principles. They've been around for 26 years this year. And it's got a membership in around 86 countries worldwide. So it's really a global effort. To build best practices. They're most well known for the Barcelona Principles, which was originally proclaimed in 2010. Our managing director has, as the Tebogo mentioned earlier, given a free voucher code for all attendees today to attend our online foundation in media measurement course. So I hope you all make use of that opportunity. It's very practical. It's not as academic as some of the other courses, so hopefully you'll get some good tips there. Please note the voucher is valid for 60 days. It will take you a few hours to do so. It's not a hugely intensive kind of course. What we'll also share is a lot of these AMEC resources. You'll get a whole documentation around the Barcelona Principles. There's the Measurement Maturity Mapper, which is an online questionnaire which you can complete, and it actually rates where you are compared to similar kind of organizations on a measurement journey. Very important is planning. That's something we forget a lot of the time. We do a campaign and afterwards we wonder how we're going to measure it. You need to plan. So all those resources are there. Very important. The framework, which is an online framework to help you. It's interactive and it guides you on how to create best practices. Then the foundation course, and then the much more intensive 3-month certificate course, international certificate course. And for those of you who want to go to Vienna in May, I would highly recommend that. It's the first time the event's going to be in real life again after all our COVID disruptions. So let's just go back to the Barcelona Principles. It was originally proclaimed in Barcelona in 2010. Now, when I think about Barcelona Principles in 2010, it feels like the Middle Ages for me. But it was just the other day. We had the World Cup that year. So much has happened since then. And I think that's why it feels like ages ago for me. When it was proclaimed, 80% of AMEC clients all over the world were still using AVEs. 2 years ago, that value had dropped to 12% as they become accustomed to much better and practical measurement purposes. Why are these important? Because it sets an overarching framework and it aligns the communications function in a strategic way. As we've just said, communication is so important, but many times it gets disconnected with what an organization is trying to achieve. And this is what the Barcelona Principles aims to achieve. Now, the way I have set up this presentation is keeping it quite basic, but after each principle, I'll show you some examples instead of going through all the principles. Remember, it's a principle. It's not a formula. It's not a rate card times whatever. It is a principle. You don't need to use all 7 principles for every campaign as well. Use what is applicable and relevant to you. It's available in 25 languages already, the principles. So as I've said, it's really a global effort, and all our global colleagues and us work very closely together, and we do it on a voluntary basis. We don't get money. AMEC is such a massive, respected organization, but we've got 2 full-time employees. That's it. The rest are all due from members working together. I think the best way I can explain it is a quote from the MEC chairman, Richard Bagnall. Even though these are competing companies in many cases, a rising tide makes all boats float. And the better we can build our industry and prove the value and the strategic value we provide, the more we can eventually charge, the more money we can make. And why is there Barcelona 3.0? This was launched in 2010. In 2015, we did 2.0. And it's really because things have changed so quickly across the world. We are now in a world of woke culture, of canceling people, of a lot more respect for different kind of communities and cultures, war. So you need to take all these things into account, and the third iteration now has identified some of those issues. The most important one by far setting a measurable goal is a prerequisite. If you don't have a goal, you can't measure. That's the long and the short of it. You are trying to achieve something. What are you trying to achieve? Why are you doing a PR campaign or a communications activity? Because you want to address something. You want to create awareness. So that goal is absolutely critical. And I think for me personally, if you set those goals, it will really make a big difference. But you can't just set a normal goal. Creating a buzz for a brand is not a goal. But yet, that's how many times we approach it. It needs to be a SMART goal: specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. Time-based is very important. If I need to improve sales for a brand, I say that's my objective. I want to improve sales. A year from now, I improved it by R1. I achieved my objective. So you can't argue with that. So you need those kind of specific ones. Now, if we look at a typical campaign objective, it is to attract new customers, improve profitability, product awareness, brand promotion, etc., etc. But just by adding a few words and making that goal SMART, suddenly it becomes much more measurable. I need to increase customers by 20% in 6 months. Now you've got something to measure again. Expanding available information. Give me 500 downloads or 5,000 downloads of the product brochure for my website in 90 days. You need to put that specific goal and put a time to it, because then measurement becomes quite easy. Principle 2, measurement and evaluation should identify outputs, outcomes, and potential impact. Does anyone know what an output is? It's exactly what it says it is. That's the media release you're sending out, or the event you're creating. But normally what we do from a PR or comms perspective is we take an SAS approach. We just send out stuff and hope it works. That's the wrong approach. So if we look at outputs, and this is typically where we stop our measurement. Publicity volume. Oh, we got 30 articles from our media release. Or we had 10 billion impressions on our social media campaign. Those are outputs, and yes, they are important. But these are just outputs. This is not where we should stop measuring. Say we had 20 likes. We also need to look at those outcomes. What is the outcome? Okay, what happened because you put something out? Did people visit your website? Stuff like Google Analytics. A lot of people don't use it, but it's so important. Was there downloads of a product brochure on your website? Those kind of things are outcomes. And then eventually, I'll get to the impact just now, but outcomes lead to an impact. So we also need to identify what is the possible outcomes, not just for the business. The old Barcelona Principle says, business, there's an outcome for the business. But now we're making it broader. What is all the possible stakeholders? Society. And a lot of the times we don't think about this. But outcomes are, as I've mentioned, those downloads and all of that. What is happening because of that? What is the impact on the organization? It could be an increase in sales. It could be cost savings, staff retention. And that's one thing which we also forget a lot of the time. Measurement's not just about what happens in the media. Public relations is not just media relations. It is what you do in your own organization. Transnet, Eskom, these guys have many thousands of employees. Without having a single article, you can run an internal campaign, and you can use these exact principles. Things like staff retention. If you have to keep on training staff every month, that's got massive cost implications for your company. So if you can retain your staff and train them better, there immediately you have a financial impact and a financial saving which you can demonstrate for your organization. This is a campaign from a few years ago. I think, what's her name? Kylie Jenner. Oh, Kendall Jenner. I don't know the Kardashians. I'm one of those people who's never watched an episode. Pepsi did this awesome ad where all the cops were, attacking the Black Lives Matter protesters, and she just came up with a Pepsi and everyone was happy. So obviously this blew up hugely in our faces. Us at Ornica had a similar situation about a year or two ago, and this is how your PR activity can quickly blow up in your face because you missed something small. We do the social media landscape report every year with Arthur Goldstuck from Worldwide Works. And it's a beautiful report. It used to cost 25,000 Rand to buy one. Now we're giving it away for free. And we had our online panel there, which consisted of all the bosses of the research companies that contributed. And all of them were old white guys. So you can imagine how this blew up in our faces. And it even slipped past our young black marketing manager. So the next thing, you've got a PR crisis, you wanted to do a big campaign here, and you have to manage that. And if you manage it well, which I think we did because it was sorted within a day, and we had 1,000 attendees on our online launch. So, but that's why I say you need to, things are going to blow up in your face. So you need to think about all those stakeholders and society impacts. Principle 4, measurements should include qualitative and quantitative analysis. Now, obviously, quantity is counting stuff and qualitative is what does it mean. Now, quantitative is important. You need to know. We can see Eskom's media coverage spiked dramatically here because of load shedding. So we need to know those kind of things. But we also need to look at the qualitative. What does it mean? Okay, we want to go into the ESG space. It's one of our big corporate clients. They're going to change their whole strategy. And they're going to go into ESG. I don't know if they haven't seen it, but all their competitors have long been there and telling the same message. So is this the right thing for them to do because it's now in vogue? So you need to look at those qualitative stuff. On a basic level, stuff like sentiment is obviously qualitative, but keeping in mind, sentiment means different things for different people. If the mine is retrenching 10,000 workers, the shareholders are very happy and it's positive for them. For the workers, it's not so great. So you need to keep that perception in mind. And my favorite of all of them, and this is the principle which has not changed since 2010. AVEs are not the value. It used to be PR, now it says communication. Who do you think is getting the best AVEs of his career ever at the moment? I'm telling you, his PR company is so happy. All their Christmas bonuses are sorted for the next 3 years. Does that sound familiar to any of you? There's a whole book on why AVEs are nonsense, which is going to get shared with you. I'm not arguing this again. If you look at what Warren Buffett said, price is what you pay, value is what you get. AVE is an advertising rate card, and that's all it is. I spent 400 Rand last year on buying a Minecraft license for my 10-year-old daughter. 400 Rand. That's the price I paid. The value I get is worth hundreds of thousands in peace and quiet. Different. And I mean, just a basic thing, and it always amazes me that PR people don't think about it. If you're getting an article in the Huisgenoot, you're going to earn 100,000 Rand. The thing on the website is going to be worth 50 bucks. That's why, and it's the same story. It depends on who do you want to talk to, what is your message, and what's the best avenue. If I need to sell funeral policies to old ladies in Rosebank, I'm going to go to the Rosebank Kalani Gazette, not the front page of the Sunday Times, and I'm going to reach my audience. My AVEs are going to look bad, but I'm going to be successful. Holistic measurement and evaluation includes all relevant online and offline channels. Now, the old principles said social media can and should be measured. 2015, it said it should be measured consistently with other media channels. Now we'll see this has changed quite dramatically. And I'm sure most of you know the PESO model, paid, earned, shared, and owned media. This is quite a good way of integrating your measurement. So typically your earned media, which is your media releases, those kind of things, or on social, where you get more shares and all of that. And owned media, I think this has really changed the ball game in the last few years, because big brands, organizations don't need to go through the mass media to reach their audiences. They can send a newsletter. You can measure the impact of that newsletter, how many people are reading it, et cetera, et cetera. And then obviously paid media, advertising. If you pay for a promoted Facebook post, it is advertising at the end of the day. And all of these work together, and it's important to see how they work together. This is a study I did about 2 years ago, and this is a real case study. I'm not shaming the brand. Let's just say they're a petroleum company. You'll see there towards the end of the month, there's two massive spikes. Now, the dark blue one is traditional media coverage, and the light blue one is social media coverage. And they spike at the same time, so they coordinated quite well. Except the traditional media coverage was about a substantial, and I mean substantial, 10, 20 million Rand donation they did to the gift of the givers. Now, obviously, the people on social were really amplifying this message and creating goodwill. Until I looked at the social media. They ran a club card competition on the same day. Why? You've got competing messages. Towards the end of the month, a spike again. A hippo walked into one of their stations. This story got reported so widely, we even picked up coverage in Morocco and Egypt. And social media went well. Was there one post from the brand to build goodwill out of this? Nothing. Wasted opportunity. But if you look at the two separately, you would think, oh, we're doing great. You start combining data, and suddenly you see where all the problems are. That's why you need to look at it from a holistic level. But it's not just traditional and social media. Event attendance, how many people are here? That is data. Your HR data. You know, what's the level of education of your people, your share price, Google Analytics, your customer relationship management kind of data. If you start combining all of these things, it becomes extremely, extremely valuable. Measurement and evaluation are rooted in integrity, transparency, and drives learning and insights. The older principle said if two different people look at it, you should get to the same result. We always look at things through rose-tinted glasses, and that bias makes us polish the results sometimes a bit more than what is necessary. But it's also the integrity kind of thing that I've got communications teams phoning me on a daily basis. They want access to this payroll article or that one. Well, I've got a subscription, you need one too, actually. Otherwise, I can just send this to everyone. The publishers need to make money. So it's not that much. Buy your subscription. And that's one thing people don't realize, because we work very closely with, in the copyright space, and we pay a lot of money in copyright. If you forward a PDF article to your client, you are in breach of copyright. Did you know that? PDF of an article. If you post that article on your Facebook page, look at the coverage I got from my client. You are in breach of copyright. Even if you wrote that article, if it gets published in the Star and they use it word for word, you are no longer the owner of that they are. We've been very, very lucky in South Africa that they haven't clamped down more on us. But as the publishers make less and less and less money, who do you think they're going to come after? So be aware of those things and be very careful. I'm sure you've all heard about Facebook getting sued for hundreds of millions because they inflated their ad figures and they kept on charging people hundreds of millions of dollars. Not being honest with their people. And that's a problem with places like Facebook. There's no independent verification of what's happening there. You can only believe what they tell you. Uber lost $100 million on ad spend, online ad spend. When online ad spend came, everyone thought, wow, we can measure greatly. It's fake. There's click farms all over the world where guys click and you think you are getting huge exposure, but it's not. So you need to look at those things. And I think insights, if you do measurement, there should be a recommendation. Okay, with the terrible year, we're not reaching our top tier media. Maybe we should reevaluate it. Maybe it's wrong. Maybe we should approach this journalist. Maybe we shouldn't spend 100,000 Rand on this campaign, but rather put it towards radio. There needs to be those kind of recommendations. Now, a lot of these examples I've shown you is part of how the integrated framework works. And this is an online framework. It's also on the resources we'll share with you. And it guides you from the planning phase through to your activities and your input phase and all of that. And it's really a project management approach. Project management has been a management tool in many industries for 60, 70 years. We just never thought about it in comms, because in comms, we want to do things our way, but it works. So you're going to have an objective. What is your comms objective? Because it needs to align with the organization's one. What inputs do you need? So that is budgets, who's going to do what? Do you need formative research? Because if I want to approach something, I need some research about it. What are the activities? So am I going to write a press release, do a Facebook video, do the output? Yes, we got so many clips in the media, and that was the eventual outcome and impact. Now, the framework, I'll give you a quick screenshot of that now, is totally interactive. We have info buttons which you can click, and it will help you and guide you on how to complete it. But it's important to think we always treat measurement as an afterthought. It's actually before, during, and after. It's a continuous cycle. You can't do a campaign if you haven't done measurement already, because you need to know what you're trying to achieve. Why do you have a problem? Why do you think you have a problem? Like I said, if you click on the resources, which we'll share with you, you go to the framework. You can even, if you want the framework in Russian or Spanish or Arabic or Dutch or German or French, Chinese, the framework's available in all those languages. We have all the guidance with that. And I would recommend highly you play with this. It works from B2B to B2C, non-profit. What we've seen is a lot of guys who's got no budget vastly improving their activities just because of using this framework. You can use it as a one-person business for one campaign. You can use it for a massive organization with a long long-term campaign. There's also the measurement maturity mapper. So like I said, you complete this questionnaire. It maps where you are on your measurement journey, because that is what it is. It's a measurement journey. Some of us are farther along on this journey, others are beginning. And it will also give you guidelines where you can look at improving. And to end off today, 2 quick case studies. This one is from 2020, during lockdown, from one of our colleagues for Visit Britain. So it's like their SA tourism. And it is quite an interesting little case which they did. So they've got a massive landscape which they need to speak to. So it's international countries, tourism bodies, airlines, global brands, media, influencers, and all of that. And obviously they've got a lot of challenges. So there's the print and broadcast, which was dominating their PR kind of activities, very broad targeting, sending out stuff. Reach and AVE were their metrics. And PR was standalone. It was not integrated in all the other kind of channels. So they stepped back and said, what are they trying to achieve? They need to grow the value of tourism now in COVID and across Britain. And how does their activities align to this, and how can they prove it? So this is very small. They created 4 basic metrics. This will explain what those metrics are, but roughly they are, and this is how they measure now. 90% of their coverage needs to be in those top target publications. So I'm going to invite a journalist from one of my top tier media, and I want it there. I had a case a few years back. I think it was Woolworths. They were asking us, why is there influencer, some wine lady, they're spending 10,000 Rand a month on her, but they don't seem to see value. So I said, well, it's easy. If you look at the blog, she's got 20 followers. Why would you spend 10,000 Rand a month on this? So in this case, don't just give money away. If you get those journalists, get the top ones. 50% of coverage needs to include a call to action. I just did a research on one of these big brands as well. And out of hundreds of articles, there were one that had a call to action. So what do you want people to do? There's no backlink in there going to the website. You're wasting those efforts. 90% of coverage to contain a minimum of 1 key message. There's a specific agenda that you want to drive. Make sure that's in your content and that people report on it. And it needs to align with that particular region. So what's happened after they've just introduced those 4 basic metrics, they can now show they're driving traffic to the Visit Britain shop. There's cash. I can track that cash. Or to bookings in a little B&B in Scotland. I can track it just because they've changed those 4 metrics, and that's what they focus on. Not a million metrics. There's a million options, but I think that is what confuses people. Because there's 7 principles, and because you've got hundreds of metrics you can choose, everyone tries to use all of them. You need to use what's relevant for your campaign. And they've really, within 2 years, totally evolved the way how they measure their communications and PR activities. And a final one from Singapore. Because it's such a highly densely populated area, everyone lives in flats. So they've got these big digital display boards where the government communicates with people in their buildings. If you walk into the building, there's your display board. But they realized something was not working here. And what they did was put some of these eye tracking kind of technologies in place. And they realized people only focus on 3 areas max on that display pad. So they needed to simplify their messages quite dramatically. So if you can see on these examples, suddenly there's much bigger core messages being placed on there. They've removed all the small gobbledygook all over the place, and their messaging has improved dramatically. Just buy something as small as that. So I think to end off today, I hope I'm still in time. Like I said, it was a challenge. I think I'm 5 minutes over. It's a journey, but every journey starts with a small step. So if you use AVEs, and that's the only one you know, start looking at top tier this month. 3 months from now, look at all messages. And within a year, your whole approach to measurement would have changed. But like I said, there's so much free resources. The only one that is expensive is the 3-month certificate. And we've given all of you a free voucher for the foundation course, so you've got no excuses. Lots of resources. The homework all depends on you now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Francois. That was an exceptional presentation. Unfortunately, we can't take the questions from Mpomokoti, but I want to give you a token of gratitude on behalf of PRISA. This is my book. It's called Kasi Nerd, and it's a fiction book that I think you'll enjoy.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much. Right, thank you.
Thank you. So that was very insightful. And we do have a lot of work to do and a lot of homework to do with the resources that we have. So I do have you on my address list. What I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that you all get all those resources so that you can look back at what was presented and you can really implement. I think there's a difference between knowing the theory and synthesizing it and applying it. And I think we need to start synthesizing and applying it. It shouldn't just be things that are nice to know, but it's things we need to implement. So I hope that was very, very useful for you, and you've learned a lot. That it's not just about how many people know your message, but what is the impact of your message. It's not just about the huge AVEs, because if I can put you in the room with a top business person, the AVEs are going to be very low. But the results of the meeting could be very impactful for your business and your career. So that is very important. Thank you very much. We do have our next speaker, who is an international speaker. And regrettably, we are slightly behind time. But I will look for our speaker now. All right, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. It is now 10 a.m. African time. Unfortunately, we are 15 minutes beyond where we needed to be, but we have 15 minutes that we've buffered into the program just in case. So without further ado, I will introduce our next speaker. She is a radio presenter, and she once interviewed me on the breakfast show on Power FM. And she's doing very good work in broadcasting. She has her own organization. And she's going to talk to us about how can we nurture relationships between public relations practitioners as well as journalists. And I think that's a very contentious space. And we need to really improve that. And I think she's going to take us through some of the techniques that we can look into. You'll just excuse us, the audience that is online, the audience that came here are enjoying a very lovely breakfast. I don't know what you're enjoying that side, but we're having fun this side. So maybe next time you should find yourself this side. But before I bring Teresa onto the stage, I wanted you to give yourselves a round of applause before you do that, because it is a packed, jam-packed audience of communicators who are taking control and taking responsibility and taking ownership of the industry. Please give yourselves a round of applause. So without further ado, I will welcome Teresa onto the stage. Let's just be a bit patient. She's gonna have to multitask here. So let's just give her 1 minute to set up and she will start, okay? Let's give her a round of applause.
I'll try to optimize my time. Actually, I'll take 30 seconds instead of a minute. And just as a statement of consolation to the guys sitting online, I'm as hungry as you are. So it's not everybody that fed, which is quite great. But a very good morning, everyone. My name is Toriso Maloka, and I am a radio presenter. Well, today, mostly here in my capacity as a radio presenter. But there happens to be a marriage of two minds in my career, because I also happen to be a management consultant. And what I've gotten to learn in that particular space really is, well, in terms of the marriage of the two minds, is the importance of communication, even in the corporate space. And I'm absolutely grateful that was covered earlier on in terms of the methodologies and measurement methodologies as well. But without further ado, why am I even here presenting on the relationship between journalists and public relations practitioners? Tebogo mentioned the word contagious, and I am one of the people who did not study journalism, studied information science. So I'm a graduate of the School of Information Technology from the University of Pretoria, and somehow by talent, by luck, and by a whole lot of work and reading, landed myself in the broadcasting space. We have seen a movement of all of that, I think, in more recent years, where you find that business broadcasters, for example, are economists, are accountants. There's a whole article written on Kaya's toll. I'm like, there's a whole lot more that's to come, because there is benefit in getting your technical people in those technical, eloquent, and articulate people in those particular, in those specific spaces. It helps navigate the line of questioning. It helps navigate the sharing of quality content. So no, I'm not just blowing it up because I myself am a management consultant and a graduate of the School of IT, but it's something that I've seen to be beneficial, at the same time with respect and honor to people who study journalism, to people who continue to craft and sharpen their skills in the space of journalism. And without further ado, I'm going to jump right into it, because I have to acknowledge that right in the beginning of the program in itself, and with some of the questions that have been asked, there's a whole lot of background that's been shared. So I'm not going to sit here and bore PR practitioners on what is PR. I'm not going to do that. And I have to really thank Francois for that, for just covering on some of the background points that I'm actually going to be tapping into just now. But what are some of the practical ways of nurturing the relationship between journalists and PR practitioners? I'm one for actionable insights. If it's not actionable, don't tell me about it. If it can't follow up, if it's not measurable, we use SMART earlier on as a measurement tool. Don't tell me about it, because then it's great talk and it really results to nothing else at all. We have to acknowledge the mutually beneficial relationship between journalists and PR practitioners. One would say that the other feeds the other distributes and disseminates. But at a data and analytics level, I think we have to acknowledge that the other has a clear picture of what audience is there and what type of audience is there, making it very important to decipher between content that I can take as a radio presenter or as a producer to put out there, and content that I should say, I'm a strong believer in not declining, when a PR practitioner says, so this is what I'd like to do. There are other platforms. It can't end at declination, because that sort of, I think, hinders on the relationship. But some of the most practical things, one that sits close to my heart, and I had to swap them around according to some of my priorities as we go, creating a healthy media ecosystem. I think we all, and when I say we all, I mean everybody in the media relations space, we all play a role and hold a very significant role in making sure that we have to pay for the journalism that we value. We touched earlier on with Francois on, the impact of subscriptions. You have to subscribe to stuff. And that is how journalists get paid. We've seen in the last year or so, in the last 2 years or so, many newsrooms took a cut. There are people that are still living on 60% of their income. And for many of us, it's unimaginable how one can even exist like that. But it's the lived reality, which makes it very important, even as PR practitioners, to lobby and continue on the conversations to say, how do we better commercialize journalism? Because that is where your content is being published, that is where your content is being distributed. And with that said as well, as that it's so important to help the journalist space to create a conducive space for paid content. It's not just great that you can just send something to a producer and say, let's have an interview with this and call it a day. It's important to investigate other methods and platforms as well, where they'll be paid, where the same journalist or presenter that is hosting that particular conversation can commercially benefit from the other. that also opens space for research and funded research. It's one thing to sit on Google and do research. I don't call it research as an information science graduate. It's a review. You're reading a bunch of things that were put together by other people and reformulating their opinion again. Research comes with quantitative and qualitative exercises. That costs money, and which highlights the importance there. Honesty saves the time. This does not just apply to romantic setups and friendship setups and family. What's your intention of the interaction? Let's be very clear about that from the get-go. And we have to ask very pertinent questions around there to say, is this going to meet the needs of my listeners? If I'm doing a midnight show, midnight to 3 o'clock in the morning, and you say to me that you want to, and at midnight, who are we talking to? Especially at a station like Power FM, where we are having, cutting and emotional conversations and conversations around foreign nationals in South Africa, undocumented foreign nationals in South Africa, people's perception on that, conversation around transformation, conversations around lived realities, inflation. Why can I not afford the heat? Why can why is it so expensive for me to travel from Mamelodi to Pretoria Central? If that's my audience and you say to me that, Toriso, at 2 o'clock, can I come talk to you 2 o'clock in the morning about selling roses in the middle of Melbourne or in the middle of Sandton? Just connect. Push this content for you because you can report it as a PR practitioner and say, we had this particular interview. It does not feed me, nor you actually, because it landed on, it's a whole thing of, we've got 100 likes. But okay, then what? What sort of happens from there on? I don't want to speed through them. I acknowledge that there's 15 minutes, but I'm going to sort of be jumping around. So one that sits probably closest to my heart is a ranging of periodic topic forecasting workshops to answer a couple of questions. I did say, and I need to acknowledge that in my bias as a management consultant, we sit in a lot of time doing research. And McKinsey and Company, in fact, in 2022, they set out to ask 2 particular questions to over 100 journalists and PR practitioners, or rather participants in the media space. And I'll call that participants, contributors in the media space. At the back of somebody could say, oh, you're not a journalist. Why are you saying? But I'm a contributor in that particular space. And these are the 2 basic questions that they've asked, right? To say, to try and find out trends, 2022 trends. What business, economics, or policy story or theme do you predict will dominate media and grab our attention in 2022? And the second question was, what topic do you think will be undercovered? And why does it merit more of our attention? This, for me, ladies and gentlemen, is where our content creation should be sitting. If we can answer these questions, we can pick up 2 topics as to what should we be focusing on, right? And this will force you to not just go to, I'm sorry, I'm going to make a few examples, not just go to, News 24 or whatever that's locally available to us in terms of research or information and dissemination. I've come to a point where now I adjust my search statements. So if I want something that I know it's qualitative and it's been well studied, it could be biased, but it's well studied. And I can cover myself to say it's well studied, it's by a credible thing. And then let's say I'm looking at topics on economics and policy for 2022. My search statement will be, what are the mega trends in 2022? At the back of it, I'll add McKinsey or BCG or Gartner or who you regard as a credible information source. Voila, at the top of your searches, you're going to get reports and qualitative and quantitative research provided by the specific researchers. We need to get over using our colleagues' information as research. I get so irritated. You see a news bulletin, and 5 minutes later, Tebogo Ditshego is president of PRISA. Next 2 minutes, same thing, different brand. I don't know, but you didn't even take the time to change the spelling errors. And for me, that's a topic of laziness, but I understand that the newsroom is also under much pressure to deliver. And that is where, as PR practitioners, we ask, we beg, and we ask of you to say, let's answer these questions. Because at any given point in time, you as a PR practitioner will have the necessary information that I need. But more so, you will also allow me to make use of some of your resources at a personal, at a people level, as well as at a research level. So if we're talking ESG, for example, in fact, walking into this building, that's exactly what I thought, that this is a green building, right? And I thought about it from a banking space to say, this actually would be such an exciting project. Imagine getting a green bond on this particular building and following up on, to say what's been the sustainable outcomes of this over a specific period. And what I mean by that is that if you merge these two and say, I'm being offered resources by PR spaces, it means that your network I have access to, which is one of the most important things. If you are at AXA, for example, and you're a PR officer there, and we want to talk ESG, why can't I have the head of ESG speak to me on radio? Why can't I ask them questions that have been publicized on different newspapers, social media platforms, but also in the nature of breaking news, but not necessarily at that title, upcoming stories. What is it that we should be able to look forward to? I think it's quite disheartening that we're constantly in the South African space looking at, whenever we talk about trends, we'll say, Americans say this. This is what's happening, guys. Why can't we be at the forefront of it? You know, in terms of certain conversations, why aren't we at the forefront of transformation conversations? It's one of our biggest challenges. When we talk about the informal, what do you call this, unequal society, for example, what makes up an unequal society? We've got the largest data and the most qualified data on what do you call this, unequal society, but we had to wait for time to publish that. Samton and Alexander are here. Your data sits right in front of you all the time. And how do we synthesize that? I think that's the word that you used earlier on, to better make sense to us. Engaging and provided content. Now, PR practitioners will come to you and tell you there's a conversation you want to have, but they won't go live, they won't go retweet, they won't go share, they won't go engage a little bit further. Conversations should extend beyond the interview you and I had at the moment. Conversations should extend to, you going onto your different platforms and say, this is a conversation I had. These are how we get where you say, this is a conversation that was had. What does it mean for different spaces? So there should be ongoing engagement onto there. Sharing of supporting media artifacts. Another thing that we just go and provide, this is the brief, that's what you're going to read, and that's it. That's what we're providing. It's so important to provide interactive content. Send me pictures, send me videos, from multiple platforms. It should not be limited to just on air, because truthfully speaking, while the smartphone penetration in South Africa sits apparently at like 2-3 smartphones per person, the bandwidth and data crisis that we have still creates a digital gap, which means that post our conversation, so many people cannot access the podcast because it's data. Data is expensive at this point in time. And bringing value to the table. We should be able, and I'm going to merge these two in terms of research and bringing value to the table. With anything you do, an interview, it's about being intentional, right? The church speaks about it, motivational speakers speak about it. Why is this news important? Why is the information that you're giving me important? Who is it targeted at? And I think out of pressure of time and out of pressure of delivery and out of pressure of commercialization, sometimes we don't ask those questions. And this is why some of the reportings and some of the news articles and some of the conversations we'll have, you sometimes look away and think, what just happened? What were we talking about? Who did that reach? Why did we have a conversation on air on a radio station that reaches millions and had 0 callers? Which on that other one for me is really around a conversation around quality and quantity, that and sometimes when you're trying to sort of determine or define who your content, who your audience is, because we don't always know. Sometimes it's an exercise to try and find out who my target audience is, and you exercise that on different media platforms. And when you do that, it's we're back at that asking those pertinent questions. But please stop planting calls when you ask for interviews on radio, because you'll have a conversation about a bottle of water. How you're producing a bottle of water with plastic that is reusable, usable 100 times, operation cost at 0, etc. And then you have 5 people pulling. So I follow this into a child. I admire you. I inspire me. Okay. There goes the Instagram post. But we have not necessarily gone into what we're here for, the product. So it's the same as writers and authors. The whole thing of, my book is best-selling. But when you look at it, like, okay, but you're right about your friends and colleagues. I'm not sure if this is still best-selling. And I think we need to get into the art of being okay with one reader and one. If they hit one person, it's fine. If they an exercise sometimes, and that muscle needs to be trained over time. I think I've touched on the ones that I wanted to touch on. I've touched on all of them actually. But a roadmap for the future, and this is something once again that I adopted from a combination of BCG, Boston Consulting Group, as well as McKinsey in terms of the insights that they provided to say, what does the future for media look like, or media relations in particular? And I bring this specifically up because in order for us to say, what value do I bring to the table to you in 4 or 5 years' time? Either as a journalist or as a PR practitioner, how do we base then sort of nurture that relationship and make sure that it's sustainable? It is about making sure that we remain abreast of developments. It is making sure that we try to grow our international footage as much as possible. If you can have your article or your podcast or whatever the case may be disseminate across the border, that's excellent. That's brilliant. And I think a lot of us don't. I mean, I was listening to myself doing my own affirmations for the year the other day. And then I called myself to order a few days later. How do you say, why so local? Why are you deciding that this should be when the platforms that you're using cut across borders? Why are you deciding upon yourself that this should be here? And be open to criticism. Someone from Ghana will tell you, speaking nonsense. You can't take an instant money product and implement it in the middle of Nigeria or Ghana, or you can't take a banking product that requires X amount of data and this type of cell phone and implement it in the middle of the rural Tanzania. Their reality, but might not be your reality in Pretoria, South Africa. And therefore, that critique enables you to say, okay, let's look at the Ghana market. What's needed in the Ghana market? And establishing those relationships with people who are sitting in those specific spaces there. So there's a couple of things in particular. Never mind my date over here. So there is participation in the creator economy. It's not just, the PR practitioners that we're expecting to deliver this particular content. What we've noticed about creator economy and creators in particular is that they drive a level of marketing that media relations, as in PR practitioners and journalists, wish for. You will have a content creator produce something, put it on social media, and it hits 500 views or whatever the case may be, with actual engagement, not just, with resharing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So how do we garner for this? How do we participate in the creator economy at the same time making sure that we're doing it quantitatively and qualitatively? You can share the most insightful information via TikTok. I learned so much about Ukraine and Russia via TikTok. It's so your social responsibility to still go back and validate those particular facts. But I think, we need to spend a little bit more time here. Using customization and personalization to appeal to customer segment. Netflix does this so well. And Netflix does this well because they've got your direct information. They know what I watched. So they're able to suggest to me what I should be watching a little bit more. So how do we investigate this? Is it via subscriptions? How are you going to get to this point where we know what the customer is looking for? Especially in spaces where you might not have direct feedback from all your all your consumers, like radio, for example. I still think that it's probably less than 1% of listeners that call into a show. So you actually don't get to interact with so many of them. And you might be working on assumptions. Hey, you might be working on increment of listenership, or, every now and then you go to a funeral and somebody says, Teresa, I listened to your show. Okay, that's data. Surely, no, I've been listening to you for the past years. That's another set of data. And to the point where people are able to tell you that this is what you're talking about, this is how it touched me, and this is how it impacted me. I'm going to start with this one. Having a clear strategic partnerships game plan. We can't depend on our own alone. If you look at the gaming industry, because whenever we talk about media relations, we choose to talk about PR practitioners and journalism. Media and gaming falls under media relations. There's so much information that's shared in the gaming space via, virtual reality, artificial intelligence, and the likes of it. And the technologist in me comes in quite excited in that one. And you look at the likes of Microsoft and Sony, they formed such good working relationships in that they're able to leverage off of each other's frameworks, each other's networks, each other's equipment. And what I mean by equipment, in terms of their worlds and their data, and therefore, and essentially increasing their pipeline. If you've got access to 500 people, and I've got access to 250 people, you and I going to a strategic partnership that is valuable for both of us, allows both of us to get to 750. The profitability model, they can always be discussed. That's a separate and independent conversation, but we need to get into the space of strategic partnerships. In fact, BCG called it have a clear strategic merger and acquisitions, right? Quite an expensive exercise for many of our houses in terms of, if Ditshego Media decides right now that I'm buying this specific company, that's a heavy financial exercise. A lot of us can't afford it in South Africa. And that is where, for me, instead of being an M&A exercise, let it be a strategic partnership. It could be on specific content. It could be in a specific season. It does not have to be a long-term standing thing. It could be an exchange of ideas to say, let's pilot it and see how that comes about. That's one. Crafting a metaverse strategy. It's every time I hear people say, we live in a 4-hour society, like we've been. 4 hours coming. No, it's been here. I was born in this. Basically, yeah. Because when you look at the element, I was born in the 90s. When you look at the element of what we call 4IR, on what we've come to understand as 4IR, it's like, but the internet is X amount of years old. The word information that's shared there there's very little that's new under the sun, but there's been exchange in the method. There's been a development and an advancement in the method, which brings us to the exercises need people in the media space to say, how do we increase our pipeline by investigating how we can leverage off of the metaverse? It starts from basic questions. What is metaverse? And all of us have to go back. Even I, as a technologist, I knew nothing about metaverse when I did my studies. It's something that I'm learning about now. How do we use and take advantage of virtual reality, artificial intelligence, and all these available tools and technologies? And Francois spoke to some of them earlier on to find our feet better. And in fact, instead of having a list of, because I know how a lot of us do it right now, you'll have a producer from Power, a producer from 702, whatever the case may be, and that's your database. It doesn't have to work like that. In a virtual reality environment, you could have access to an aggregate that says to you, here's a list of 1,000 producers in Africa, or 1,000, this one focuses on ESG, this one focuses on entertainment, this one focuses on that. And your hits can go to those particular people, which makes it so important. And I'm going to urge everyone when we leave here today, please let's investigate tools that we haven't yet used to better access the type of personnel that we require to disseminate that level of information for us. And like I said earlier on, sometimes to just test a different market with the same information that you have, because it helps you to better advance, on your level of information. As someone who works on a radio station and, due to my 9 to 5, having to do a show as late as I do, if there's one thing I learned is that it's so important to not only study your audience and how you deliver information to them, but to also understand how they better understand it and how you can better advance them. If you've been listening to Teresa for a year, you should not be the same person a year later. You should know a whole lot more about mental health, about policy, about economics, about what's happening in and around the world. Your vocabulary should not be the same, quite in fact. And those are some of the things that I think we need to sort of, and that's where for many people, they'll say, I stopped listening to this particular show. It's not because Teresa started boring you. And that's, I don't think we always realize it, but you stopped advancing. You stopped learning. And we need to constantly go back into those workshops to workshop those ideas and questions and take it a little bit further. And in closing, I was doing my reading. A couple of consulting houses have been doing research to say, what are some of the threats, right, that journalists, or that are sort of being faced or understood between journalists and PR practitioners in particular. So I found this quite interesting. There was over 200 actually, participants that were being asked questions here around what are the biggest threats currently facing the news industry. And there's something that I wanted to zoom in particular, where if you look at, 54 participants identified publishers' focus on revenue over journalistic mission as being among the biggest threats to their profession. And we've seen that happen. People just want to get news out, put news out there. But one that stood out for me is 53% cited propaganda or public relations output dressed as news. We see that a lot happen. In fact, that's the biggest threat. And this is not a threat to quality of journalism. It's a threat to the profession. And then I've heard a lot of people speak about, will journalism still exist? Well, there'll still be news. Will journalism still exist? There'll still be that, there'll still be that. But we need to honor and respect, the two crafts, or the relationship and the mutually beneficial relationship between the two crafts, such that we don't have to ask such questions. The question should be, how do we advance to deliver to the next generation? The question should be, what is the sustainable method that we're going to follow here? What is the sustainable approach that we're going to follow up here? The question should be, when I retire from this particular space, what is it that I'm leaving as a legacy? What is it that I'm leaving as a trail for the next journalist? Or a peer practitioner, if a peer practitioner in your office is having the same challenges as you are having, or as you had 10 years ago, there's something wrong you did. Please personalize it, actually. It's a you problem, that one, because you got in, you did your job, and you called it quits. It wasn't about advancements. And I think, just in closing here, one of the things that I truly live by is that a job is a gift, right? And this is not to say that we go and you big HR, no, not necessarily. A job is a gift because it's an opportunity to contribute to society beyond your own understanding sometimes. The president of the country, when he started his administration, he used the concept of tumami, right? Send me, essentially. In your very space, that's your job. You should be doing that to create impact. Yes, a lot of us are in spaces where you can't call it a major wealth generating industry, right? For many people, it's a labor of love, but you chose it. And you have to choose it every day. And it's not going to be an easy choice every morning for you to choose. But the bigger question should really be about impact. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is me.
No questions. I think she deserves a standing ovation. Wow, that's amazing. That was an amazing talk. And I think beyond just the content of what you said, to have such a young person who was born in the 90s, I won't give her age away, but she's very close to being a born free, to be so passionate about what she does, to be so insightful, to make numbers look sexy, because numbers are really boring, but I don't know how you made them look so good. And I think that's the first thing I want to say. And I need to give out, Toriso is one person that as soon as you meet her, you become an instant fan. And you wonder, where have you been all my life? And she has that charisma. So I do want to firstly start by giving you a token of gratitude, which is the book. You should have taken off your heels so I can look taller in that picture. And I think secondly, I'm going to give you guys her Twitter handle so that you can follow her on Twitter, Toriso Maloka. And if you want to book her or you want to have further engagements with her, just send me a message and I'll forward it to her. It's president@prisa.co.za. But what she said is very important, even when she spoke about the environment within this office, speaking to what Francois said, when you're looking for impact, you could actually calculate the impact that this building has on the environment. And I just loved how you went into it. I think in terms of the people who are online, what we will do is we will share the video of these sessions to you because we have recorded the audio here. The audio may have not come through for the online people as you may have wanted it to do. And she said, Tebogo Ntabiseng says that was superb, a superb presentation. And Mpho Mokgotsi is saying that very fundamental strategic links need to be nurtured. I think one of the profound things you spoke about is the ecosystem that you needed to build. But I was actually surprised at the extent of the ecosystem that you identified. It is actually very broad. And I think there are many opportunities we can look into there. So thank you very much to Toriso for that exceptional presentation. And we are going to go to our next speaker, who is on the board of PRISA. She is a senior lecturer at the University of Johannesburg, head of department also of the Department of Strategic Communication from the last time I checked. recently did get her PhD. Maybe it wasn't that recent, but she's now Professor Renee Bieneka. When I say professor, she says, no, just say Renee. And I want us to congratulate Professor Bieneka for publishing her book, which is about strategic communication. Let's give a round of applause for that. Now, she's going to be giving us insights into what they have uncovered in terms of our profession and new theories that we need to look into, new insights that we need to explore. And so this is a very important moment because you will be one of the first to get reflections from this book. So I just want us to give Professor Bieneka a very warm welcome, and I will start your presentation now, and we will proceed with the presentation. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Tebogo, and thank you for the wonderful opportunity to see so many of young and older and more mature presenters and members of PRISA. It's actually wonderful. Tebogo and the team, I want to start off by saying congratulations to this beautiful event. I know we often have technical issues, and we will hopefully have Prof. Keys online soon, but this is really, and somebody said to a colleague of mine, which is also one of our facilitators, she loves the new look of PRISA. So thank you to you and the team. This is so wonderful to share this little podium with such wonderful young talent. I was sitting there in absolute awe of what you presented. You could have been a graduate from any institution. Yes. Of course, more likely UJ, but now you selected this wonderful competitor of ours, Tux. But they did a marvelous job. But when I listened to you, I really knew that this book that I had the privilege and the honor to be part of, ladies and gentlemen, is really so well placed. It is exactly talking about this shift in thinking that we need. It is very, very concerning that we still have situations that we quote from a journalist perspective of how the PR person, and I derogatively would often call them PR poppies, and it's not PR poppies only, but because there are some males there as well. But the PR person is known to be only driven by, let's meet the ABE outcome. Let's see how many send and pray things we can send out without actually understanding what it is, the impact that we have, the real responsible work that we do as professionals, both on the creative side. And I had the privilege of meeting with one of the authors, Byron John, last week, and he just shared with me his approach to creativity. And, you know, very often we think that we are either or, you know, we either a maths person or we either a word person. And we have this whole black and white issue always. What happens to the middle ground where we actually can meet each other? So that's what we tried with this book, is to really, in 2018, when my late supervisor, late Prof. Sonia Verwey and I started working on the conceptualization of this book, we really looked at some of these key issues that we are grappling with and have been grappling with for as long as I've been in this industry. Now, I smiled when you said retire from this place. I think I'm a little bit closer to that part than you are. But yes, there are so many things that we need to fix, guys, and opportunities for us to fix it, from the young and the older and the middle group. So what was the purpose of this book? Many people think that it's a textbook. It's not a textbook. It is really a book to deal with how we are thinking in South Africa. And another thing that I loved you saying, and please, this is an international platform, but I do believe we forget the wonderful opportunities that we have as South Africans and the knowledge that we have as South Africans. And this is why we started off with this book, asking South African questions. And yes, we have the Southern Africa PRISA, and we deal with other chapters and our regional chapters. But there is such wealth of knowledge. And that has really been my quest with many of my colleagues on the academic side, is to represent the wonderful work that our scholars are doing in South Africa. And we're not even scratching the surface. And that I'll get to the challenge that I have for us all in this room. And I shared some of the ideas with some people informally. So the purpose of the book was really to look at the current theory and practice. Now, something which is close to my heart as an academic, obviously, and, even though I'm an academic for 25 years now already, you see, I'm closer to that. I was in industry as well. For me, being involved in have our feet in the real world, so to call it. My students often laugh when I say, but there's no difference between real world in this context and real world in that context. It's a world. And my reality as an academic is as relevant as somebody else's reality in a big agency or in a nonprofit. We need to stop, having all these little boxes. We love putting labels to people and boxes to people. You fit into that box because you drive fancy new Merc that's not giving you trouble at the moment. Therefore, you must have these and these qualities. That's nonsense. What happens to that person, that wonderful human being that you negate by saying you fit this box or you fit that box, and we forget about all the other wonderful things? So practice and theory is one whole. It's not the either or. Yes, we study theory in university, and it's important because we need to know what's current. Everybody has thoughts. Everybody has opinions. So how do we test those opinions? Does it make it into a book? But who says that's the only opinion? So this is a start. This is really a start to all of this. So that was, the book was really to showcase the different way of thinking, that we are not just looking at the North Americas and the European scholars for how we practice and think and do and dream about strategic communication, but that it's actually an overarching concept. Strategic communication is an overarching concept for PR, for marketing comms, for marketing to a large extent, for digital comms, for your corporate communicators. Everybody is moving towards this thing that we call creative, using information to the benefit of others. So that's where we started. And then we had, now the screen doesn't want to move, don't worry. And for our audience, I don't know, did you do a share for the audience online? Okay. Oh, okay. So I really am humbled by the amazing group of people that contributed to this book. With Prof. Vey, that unfortunately and very untimely, I don't think death is ever timely, is it? But the very, very sad death of my friend Sonia in 2019 left me with a bit of a a challenge. And it was probably one of the biggest challenges, apart from my PhD studies. That was, guys, those of you that have your PhDs will know, and that's working towards that. And I hope that's everybody in the room. Well, no, there are some things in this life that you really think at this stage, why am I doing this to myself? But yes, we did it. We made it. But at that stage, I still remember at the funeral, which we all know how sad and lonely funerals can be, I promised her husband that the book will be finished. It will meet the printers. It did take us 3 years later, but 17 of us worked on this book as a real product of love, because nobody got any money for this. And it's original research, my friends. It's not looking at somebody's information and then giving it through as your own, firstly. There's no plagiarism in here. It went through rigorous checking. But it's also primary research by our top scholars, and some of our top scholars, it's not everyone, in our country. So I'm really proud to say that this book is working on, and you can be proud when you purchase this book as to the work that's being done on this. Many of my colleagues has gone through several phases of getting the copy back, having to fix it. Then the brilliant team of editors at OUP at Oxford University Press went through this book with a fine tooth comb. What's that saying? That one. I shouldn't forget the comb part, otherwise we may have a different concept here. But and the readers which are completely out of this, removed from this industry, they are editors, copy editors, said to me when they started off reading the first 2 chapters, they thought, oh my word, this doesn't make sense. I don't know what this is trying to achieve, etc., etc. And we worked through it because it's really different mindsets that we need to have in our industry. And this is what the book starts off with. Speaking about the change in paradigms, we're not just looking at only a few sets of data. And Francois, what you said, and I shared it with somebody, was to me absolutely one of those wow as well. We so easily, and it's so quick, because then at least I have some material to show a client. But we look at a graph and we say, yes, we've reached our target. But we only look at it in one view and only take one set of data. And we forget that there are so many influences. And the book tries to do that. We looked at it from different angles. We don't look at only one story. We don't look at only one interpretation. So you will find criticism and critique about the whole range of theories that we've been studying, that we've been trying to apply. But it also then, and that is what I have a problem with very often, if we get stuck into just criticizing and just saying critiquing, we so often then get stuck in, so what next? What is the solution here? And that's where we then started with this. But a book is a limiting thing. Then you can have a list at all the stuff, and all the necessary things are there. Brand is there, and things like employee engagement and brand legitimacy, all the brand stuff is there. But then we started looking at things like social justice. How does social justice, social capital, the power of the individual, the agency of the individual, actually play a part in what we are doing, what we call public relations, or strategic communication then for that matter. So the approach that we ended up with, and that is really the last chapter, chapter 19, deals with some crazy, lovely developments in our industry. And it is really just whetting the appetite, because a lot of work needs to be done around that. Metamodernism. Now, those of you that's done your studies, formal studies, would know about modernism and postmodernism. We have now a South African-born metamodernism paradigm. And that's being done, and our own wonderful doctor, and she's a facilitator for PRISA as well, Dr. Irma Meyer, she did her PhD studies at UNISA on metamodernism. So I'm proud to say that somebody of our own making in South Africa, South African scholar, is setting the trend with current thinking. So metamodernism is not the marriage between the two, and this is not a metamodernist presentation, but it is really looking at the value of both the traditional paradigms and so forth. Then, which I'm very interested in personally, is transdisciplinarity. And how do we break these silos that we've been working in for so many years and actually team up with strategic partners, as what we've heard about this morning. Team up with your IT people, Tony. Team up with your marketers, not see them as absolute, those guys that we don't want to talk to because they are our competitors, but team up with them. And then very big principle is agility. And how do we adjust to the current situation that we are having in the world? I said to somebody earlier on, we get so stuck in just looking at some form of normality, whatever that will be and was. And, we daydream about the old days. Forget it. It was alive. It was good. It happened. It was good while it lasted. We're in a wonderful new time to build new knowledge. And that new knowledge comes with information that we share, not keep, share, and then our experiences and speaking to each other about it. So technology is obviously high on the list. Interconnectivity. It's something as obvious as us being interconnected. I shared with Francois earlier on, we have a mutual friend, which we didn't know about. Francois and I know each other about 20 odd years. No, Francois? That's why I could give him a hug when he walked in, because he's an old friend. But we forget that all obvious things was not regarded as a set of data. Only now when we label it, now it's a set of data. Let's actually look at our own experiences. Let's look at the value that each and every one of us can contribute. Let's learn the skill of identifying the moment. A lot is done around mindfulness training and all of these awareness trainings. But what happens? Woke, VUCA, all of those terminologies are there. But it's just because we, as humans, think that we are separate from who we are. We are separate from, one day now I have my label on and I've got my clothes on as being a lecturer. And then I forget that I'm also a mother and a wife and X, Y, and Z. We are whole packages. Organizations are whole units. They're entities, but yet we are trying to put them into little boxes. And then, of course, the changing role. And one of the biggest things for me is how can we train people and educate people in literacy, media literacy, how to read, how to look for fake news, how to actually ask critical questions. But is that true? Or am I being emotional here because it speaks to my mind? If somebody throws a paper out of his car window and I get onto my hooter, what does that make of me? Am I aggravating or am I highlighting something that is wrong? How does it actually play a part? And how do I bring that being and that action to what it is that we as communicators want to portray. And then, of course, transformational leadership. And that is, if any of you are looking for a study, leadership in communication is one of the biggest areas that we need help in as academics and as industry. So, just briefly then, ending off, this thing is really freezing often, and it's not even cold. Availability of this wonderful publication at the, if I can have a sales talk, somebody said to me earlier on, my friend Ethel from Avatar said to me, how do we train students to actually understand sales? Communication students to understand sales. Now I'm going to do a sales pitch, which is completely out of my character. 500 Rand, various institutions. There are some leaflets here for those of you that are interested in purchasing the book, if you want to read more about it. But to me, far more important is for you to actually start thinking differently about what it is that we are doing every day. And that is then, for me, with the exciting challenge that I have for us. And I'm including me in this, and Ethel and I have been trying to start writing case studies. And we have these amazing opportunities in South Africa because we are so diverse. We have so many things happening to us all the time. We are positioned between Russia and Americas now. We BRICS, oh glory. Do we like the Russians and the Chinese and so on? Or do we like the guys who actually give us money sometimes? So, you know, all of those challenges are the things that are real in our experiences. And why don't we start writing about it? Why do we wait for how many years? Now, you know, if we just think, we took 50 odd years of international global theory to have a book to write about theories, and there's millions of stuff. Just the other day, I heard this beautiful thing of that they are going to start translating academic articles in Swahili, because you know that there's only about 6 million, I think, or some other ridiculous number, 600,000 probably, articles available in African language, in Swahili then, which is supposed to be claimed, according to my friends in Kenya, the most spoken African language. And there are 60 million, for argument's sake, English articles, academic articles. Yes, we can argue a book goes onto, and the thesis go on onto a shelf in a library, and some other clever person tries and reads and summarizes and reinterpret, etc. But why don't we start writing up our own experiences, our own knowledge in South Africa, in some of our vernacs, and let our students study that? But now we are left with English only. And I'm not negating anything. Please, it's not, I started off by saying it's not a either or. It's a rather connected opportunity that we have. So start reading, start thinking, start writing. We hope to have a platform soon between Tabasile, and I did see Tabasile's name earlier on, my co-author, that we can have a platform where we can start sharing and have some local knowledge and local theories and local case studies that our own students can use. And that is me. Now it's my opportunity to give this book to Tebogo, and not him giving me a token of appreciation.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Renee. Thank you. Thank you very much. Another round of applause. Zianda. Can you come to the front? Let's hand these out. Let's hand these out. Yeah. All right. So she's going to hand out the pamphlet so that you know where to get the book. And I just wanted to thank Professor Beneke once again. Professor Beneke is one of a kind in our industry, having dedicated so many years, not only to lecturing, but also developing the next generation of theories as well as professionals. I'm one of the professionals who came from her hands. She knows of me when I was still 18 years old. That's why she looks at me a bit funny. She's like, I know you. And I was a very naughty student, but I grew and I became more mature. And she saw leadership potential in me. And she's one of the main reasons I'm the president of PRISA. So give her a round of applause for that. And I think what I found very profound, I'm doing my MBA currently at Gibbs Business School, and I think I found something very profound where Professor Beneke spoke about putting people in boxes. So as soon as she said that, I thought about the market segmentation theory, which I found to be very useful. You know, where you segment a market based on geography, based on your demographics, based on your lifestyle and all of those things. But she is correct. Because just because you are from maybe KwaMashu in the KZN doesn't mean I'm going to find you on Ukhozi FM. It doesn't mean that you don't listen to Highveld stereo. It doesn't mean that the kind of diet that you eat, you might want to go on a vegan diet. You don't always have to eat umngqusho and all those things that are stereotypically seen to be eaten in that area. So what we need to do as communicators, and I think with your permission, Renee, we need to understand that theory is a framework, can give you a framework and a basis to work on, but you have to understand the complexities of reality. So you have to also continuously develop your theories and your understanding of how to communicate based on the complexities of what is real. And another thing is the complexity of an ever-changing environment and audience to speak to. I may have these interests today, but my interests may change. I may have these beliefs today, but over time, my beliefs may change. And so we need to continuously develop our understanding of what it is that our audience needs and how we can communicate with them. And as young people, I also think that we need to broaden our understanding of what is communication, the difference between hearing, listening, understanding, and applying. Certain things, you can hear them and you can act like you're paying attention, but you may not be listening. Listening is the process in which you want to develop an understanding. So you listen for you to understand. Some people hear so that they can respond because they want to counter what you are saying. And so you can hear the person, you listen to them, you understand it, and then you apply it. And the application phase is where it becomes more useful. Because it's one thing to understand something, but if you're not applying it, then it has lost its potential. In science, they call it kinetic energy before the potential is realized. And so we need to look at it over and above that. And as we become communications professionals, we must move beyond just being the people of understanding and become the people of application who apply this knowledge that we are learning. And we need to be very inquisitive. So when we communicate, there are things that we say that communicate, and there are things we don't say that communicate. Your posture communicates something. Your body language communicates something. Your attitude communicates something. But I think what communicates the most is your choices. Your choices communicate the most. We can agree on something right now, but if I do something opposite to what we agreed on, then that shows that there's a difference between what you say and what you do. And so I just wanted to introduce the concept that I have of what is a brand. So in my view, a brand is a promise represented by a sign or a symbol of a certain quality of product or service. So you can even flip it around and say, a brand is a promise of a certain quality of product or service represented by a sign or a symbol. So a logo is not a brand. It's a representation of a brand. A brand is what you stand for. So it's what you promise and what you do. So if you understand a brand in that context, you will know what is a weak and what is a strong brand. And this will help you understand the reputation that you have and people's perceptions about you. So a strong brand is one that more often than not keeps its promise. And a weak brand is one that more often than not breaks its promise. So just a funny little story. As you guys were enjoying your breakfast, we were running beyond time and Renee was like, yeah, we need to start. Because she understood that if we don't start at the time that we promised, then it's going to weaken our brand. And it starts at small things like punctuality and having courtesy if you are being late to communicate that I will be late. But it goes beyond that. It has very serious consequences. If you are the kind of person who overpromises even with the right intention and underdelivers. And it's also a trap if you're going to completely underpromise and overdeliver, because if you don't promise enough, they're not going to look forward to what you have to offer. So you have to find that sweet spot where you could promise something substantial, that is very competitive, that is very compelling, that is just under the delivery that you're going to give, so that you exceed what is expected. So we need to take expectations very seriously. What do we make people to expect, and how we deliver on those expectations? And it will then go to the core of some of the things we're trying to develop, which is trust, understanding. Trust and understanding. So when Toriso said that one of the greatest risks for journalists is propaganda and public relations, I wouldn't be surprised if that is the view, that propaganda and PR is the same thing. I wouldn't be surprised if propaganda wasn't the word used and it's actually PR as a synonym of propaganda. Now, let's say, for an example, I make a mistake. And now you're going to report on a mistake that I made, right? Now you're going to ask me questions about a suspected mistake that I have made. When I communicate with you, it is not to convince you that I didn't make a mistake. If I made a mistake, it's to make you understand perhaps why I made the mistake and how I'm going to resolve that issue. That is probably the worst case scenario. So with crisis communication, we're not trying to switch and spin something bad that we did into something good. We're not trying to defend the indefensible. All we're doing is telling our story and creating an understanding, because there's always two sides to the story. So you'd rather report the story with an understanding of both sides than to report the story with one person saying this and the other just defending themselves. So it's clarity, it's understanding, so that we can build a relationship. But as Toriso spoke about the danger of PR, I then asked myself, imagine you're in a relationship with somebody. Let's say I'm the girl and she's the boy, right? So if she would have said to me, the greatest risk in our relationship is as soon as you communicate with me. What kind of a relationship is that? That as soon as you open your mouth, there's a risk. As soon as he opens your mouth, it's a risk to our relationship. And the communication shouldn't be the risk. It should be the glue that binds us together, which is why we should be ethical in how we communicate. Be smart, but be ethical in how you communicate. She also spoke about how people go onto radio or television and then they'll get their cousins and their aunts and their uncles to call and say how much of a big fan they are of you. Rather than just going there, doing the interview and listening and getting the data, because now you're losing an opportunity to get data that can be useful for you. as you build a better understanding and as you communicate with people. So I think that is where we need to go. I wanted just to wrap it around, just a general understanding, especially for the students who have joined us, to just get a sense of the direction that we need to take. Another thing is perhaps we underplay the role of listening and communication, because listening is the most important part of the whole communication process. And the reason why listening is such an important part of the communication process is, what are you going to communicate if you don't understand the person you're communicating with? If you don't ask questions, if you don't try to figure out, if you're not thoughtful, what are you communicating if you don't understand your audience? And so that's why design thinking is so important. Students, go and look up design thinking. It's a very important strategic tool. And the first step of design thinking is empathy. Empathy is not just understanding. Empathy is putting yourself in somebody else's shoes and feeling what they feel. And so when you design something for someone with empathy, you design it specifically for their needs. And that's based on the insights that you have. It can be also influenced by creativity, where you say, if I was this person, what would I want? How would I want to be communicated with? And so look up design thinking as you develop strategies and your communications tools. And the last thing, I just think this is a very important moment for our industry, because if we can have sessions like this more often, we will be able to develop more respect for our industry. Firstly, we will respect it more, we will apply it better, but we will also be respected much more. Thank you very much. Mabo and Claire. Give them a round of applause there for that. They're from the National Lottery Commission, so you guys just missed out on billions and billions. She says they don't have the numbers. But we're going to interact with them and form partnerships with the national. It's different from the National Lottery, which is where you get the numbers. The commission is what the people who distribute the funds and so on and so forth. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I do not believe that we have our last speaker on the line. Keith, I think he is here. No, I see Kevin Halama. I don't see Keith here. So we'll just take this opportunity, maybe if we have any questions on the floor or any comments from the floor, and then we'll take comments online, and then we'll wrap up and just get to know each other. Yes.
I would say, corporate environments or agency environments or every environment we get, it's our responsibility, particularly with media relations, to say, this is not just about the likes and reaching 1,000 listeners. To be suspect, 1%, it's about the impact that we make. And it's so caught up in what the client wants versus what we know is going to be what our audience wants to hear. And I think media are often seen as passive labor, and they have to do us a favor. That's sort of the end, and that's not how it should be. And as PR practitioners, that's our job to make sure that our clients understand it, because they're not there to do us a favor. Our partners. Absolutely. Just want to add that comment. It's fantastic, by the way. It's so amazing.
And your name?
It's Bonnie.
Bonnie. Thank you very much for that. And I think that's very important. As Bonnie has said, that we need to see our relationship with the media as mutually beneficial. And I think one of the responsibilities of PRISA is to create that better understanding. It's our responsibility. We need more platforms like these and to bring more journalists here so that we can educate them. But I think also what's important in what you've said is the pushback for our clients. So I think sometimes what the client thinks is we just implement and then we'll tell you what to say about it. Rather than saying, let me bring you in the implementation process so that you can also come up with ideas of products and services and approaches that we can use, to drive these products. And it'll be an easier and a better sell if we're able to be involved in the process than to be put in at the end and just told to make me look good. And it's a part of educating our clients, and that's very important.
Thank you. Just time this on Islamic communications. I'm one of those people who's very critical of PRISA, but I want to know what the past couple of months of seen a great improvement. It's just beautiful. It makes us proud to be members of PRISA. I'd just like to say keep it up. And thank you so much for the informative session. I've known the Barcelona Principles for quite a while, but having Francois up there actually present gives us more insight. We can now go back to our clients and tell them that, look, let's take this route instead of it being AEE, even if it's negative coverage, but the marketing manager can also go back to the board and say, check this out. This is how well we are doing. So that was great. And also for Turks as well. That was insightful. I think that is what we need as PR professionals, to just get commentary from journalists. I mean, I've been on the publishing side and I've received a lot of PR material where you're like, this is not for our but then we also find ourselves as well going up there, actually giving that to our journalists as well. So I'd like to say keep it up, PRISA. I'm actually proud to attended a workshop, and it's a big improvement. This is what we need as professionals, just go and we just hang around each other and also get more information. So thank you, and we'd like to also take part.
I think what Thabiso is saying is very important. He spoke about how important these interactive sessions are, and that he does complement the continuous improvement that he sees. But I think also when we look at just agencies, for an example, we're not necessarily constantly competing with each other. And I think one of the mistakes that we make is we become overly competitive, with each other, when we actually have to help each other to grow this industry. And why it's important is, as Francois said, is that a rising tide enables all the ships to rise. So we must first be organized, understand each other, understand the industry, have the best practices in place, and sometimes we must bind together. A part of what PRISA needs to do moving forward is we need to look into these RFQs and these tenders that are put out and the kind of things that they put PR agencies through. There's certain things like asking you to develop a strategy for free and then giving you a deadline within 48 hours, I need this to be done. And after it's done, after 72 hours, I need you to present. It is disrespectful of our industry. And once we've regulated the industry, brought the industry together, we will be able to pull together and say, this is unacceptable, and this is what is acceptable. And we will say, we're pulling out of this pitch. We're not going to get any PR agency to do this work. And it's against the law to use, agencies that are not registered with a professional body, because this is a life and death industry. And so thank you very much for seeing that. And I think all PRISA members see this, and we need to grow it, further and deeper moving forward. We have a question that side, yes, or comment?
Yes. Thank you so much. I have to come from the corner because the rest of most people at this side. My name is Tebogo, my president. Thank you so much in absentia. I'm Tebogo from Communication University in Tokyo, Japan. Our university is called Global Transformation University. I'm responsible for the Africa region. I'm a communications lecturer by profession. Now, when Prof was speaking, she's not here, I have to wait for her. But when you were speaking, I wish you could see. I wrote here, oh my God, how confident, I love her. That's what I wrote here. Now, not because of that, but also because she was speaking and she was telling the story as she knows it. Now, the question that I had for her was, what do you think of the relationship between media persons? I'm talking about journalists, etc., and social media today. Secondly, what amount of research is done by media houses with specific reference to Power FM? I'm just so proud of it. I'm proud of it. But, Mr. President, Prof. Beneke is not here. Maybe please ask her when you see her, because we do see each other a lot and you're working together. Ask her, maybe just give her my comment about, I'm sure members can agree, the need for media literacy across, not only for journalists or PR practitioners, but tourism, online journalism, netizens, Mr. President, citizen journalism. So PRISA says a lot of work to do, because we need to educate people about clicking and sending and repercussions therefore. We need to educate even the politicians about, the fact that even just no comment, Fikiri Mabula was in the news and he was dodging the question. So I just wanted to make those points, and please go to Global Transformation University, Tokyo, Japan. We've got programs there for Africa. We've got programs on STEM, etc. Thank you so much, Chair.
I'm going to give a quick stab at that one. And I heard that you say that you have programs on global transfer. I'm looking for a master's program, by the way. I've been looking for 7 years. So I'm willing to take on ideas. And you mentioned STEM there, and can I just add to that we talk about science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, right? Often comes to my benefit because I am a graduate of that particular school. But I think it's so important that we start talking STEAM, science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics. And because that's where we really just leverage in, our PR practitioners, our media personnel into that conversation. Amount of research that's done. So, I'm a presenter at Power FM, and there's not a single producer that I have worked with that does not have a BA honors or a master's in different fields. One of the shows that I did, in fact, the gent, he was a freelancer and he had an MCOM in economics, had a 9 to 5, just like me, and we do radio in the evenings. So the amount of research for me that's done, I don't underestimate it, because it might not always come from the online platforms, right? It could come from his day-to-day at work. It could come from his master's dissertation or whatever the case may be, and my own exposure there. So there is extensive research. I do note that there are times where even I would listen to some of my colleagues or some of my own content, like, there was a shortage of synthesis there, where you just took in whatever you read and then you sort of publicized it or shared it, which is very irresponsible, because we should be held accountable for truth, transparency, and integrity. I think I answered the questions.
Yes. Thank you very much. Oh, I forgot to tell my PRISA member, see, I'll be Japan Public Relations, so I'm a member of PRISA as well.
Well done. Today's session is hot, eh? We have some students who have questions coming forward. I think you can stand on the stage, get yourself some experience of coming on stage. Come in there, come.
Okay. My name is Jessica. Hello, everyone. Today, my name is Jessica Bolazinga. I'm from Student Public Relations Association at UJ. My question is, as a student, how do I use the theoretical theories that I've been given to actually integrate into an actual practical sense? For example, how do I build network? How do I build relationship with different businesses?
So you can go because the mic is
Hello, everyone. I'm Rebecca. I'm the founder and managing director of Prerequisite Communications. I'd like to answer your question. I'd say you need to start getting experience while you're still at school. Approach organizations and actually put yourself out there, whether the organization is in PR or in other industries. You need to put yourself out there and your skills in order to actually grow and establish yourself as a professional.
And I mean, you mentioned something about, student approach organizations, and I think that's so important. You know what's the best way to do it? Be a part of student faculty houses. Yeah. Because when you contact ABSA and say, ABSA, my name is this person from University of Johannesburg, we would like for you to come talk to us as students. You've already got that name behind you. Yeah. So join faculty committees on that worked magic for me. It just makes life so much simple for you. You could do it behind SRC name, behind the humanities house faculty, whatever. You could be head of sports. In fact, it doesn't have to be anything that's related. But the fact that you're going to contact, a founder of a media house saying, I'm contacting you from, because they also would like students to know about them. So it works on your behalf.
But that's in my experience, actually, the management actually getting it.
I'm just trying. Just try. Just try.
Okay.
Hey everyone, my name is Sipati Ndlovu. I secretly call myself South African Ndlovu because my initials spell SA. But anywho, I'm from the University of Johannesburg and I'm a member of SPRA, popularly known as the Student Public Relations Association. So hello, I'm very excited to be here. A very informative session, I have to say. I have never heard anything about the Barcelona Principles, and I am so excited that I'm leaving here with that information. And also what I wanted to tap into is what Prof. Beneke said about diversifying yourself as a communication specialist. I just started being a presenter at UJ, so you're one of the people I'm looking at the moment. And at some point, I felt a bit confused because I didn't know if I was going into the right direction, especially going into presenting as a PR and communication student. But after what Prof. Beneke said, and of course, Toriso said, I'm very excited to know that I've actually been tapping deeper into what my profession is about. And the other thing that I wanted to say and ask, especially for brands out there, maybe corporate brands, we had an assignment, interesting, we had to engage with like a corporate social responsibility campaign. And when we went there to engage with the campaign, I won't say the name of the brand and the campaign itself, but when we tried to engage, of course, we were engaging with the employees of the brand. They were not so enthusiastic about communicating about the campaign itself and all of that. So I wanted to know from the corporate private PR, how can we try and engage the employees of a brand to be more informed about CSR campaigns in the organization so that, of course, they engage other external stakeholders? Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Molamudi Mokhadi from Rosebank College at Bramfontein campus. Prof. Rene said something about putting theory and practice into one thing these days. And then I heard Toriso saying something about doing a qualitative and quantitative research costing money. So I want to know, because I, as a student, will be given questions in assignments that says, do a research on a certain topic. So when I do research, I just take my phone and go on Google, and sometimes I do use Scholar. So I want to know in the real world, like when you say it costs money, what does this mean? Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Lamhang Mulobi from Roth Media Productions. First of all, I want to say thank you to all our presenters and our speakers. There's a lot of information that I have gained and learned, and that just reiterated my passion for this field. I just wanted to pose a question to Tori. So you mentioned that we need to interact and engage with the creator field, content creators, influencers. And I think you also mentioned that, media is usually the ones that we have to hold accountable. How do we hold influencers and content creators accountable for misinformation? Because I know for me personally, I engage so much with influencers and content creators, but sometimes they give misinformation and then the public is like, what a flop. How do we hold them accountable for portraying all the messages and or maybe misleading audiences and stuff like that? Thank you.
Practice makes perfect, so it's important for the students to come and get comfortable on stage. The more you practice, the better you become. Before we answer your questions, I have good news. Professor Keith Summerville is online. He's ready to present, and he's going to be talking about framing newsworthy stories in the African context. Now, Professor Keith Summerville he's joining us from London, if I'm not mistaken. He's not in South Africa, not in Africa, he's in London. So he's joined us all the way there to give us these insights, and these are very important for us to get. And I think another reason this is so important is because he is internationally one of the authorities on the framing of newsworthy stories. He has written several articles about this. And so this is very important for you to understand how are stories framed, some of the case studies that he has, and his perspectives and insights in this regard. So, Prof, without further ado, you can unmute your mic and we can rock and roll. Thank you so much for joining us. And we're really looking forward to hearing your insights in this regard. Yes, you have successfully unmuted. I'm going to remove myself from the view and you can take over. Prof, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much and good morning, everyone. And I hope it's warmer where you are than it is in London. It's gone back to freezing cold in London. Very briefly, before going into framing, I'll give you a quick snapshot of my background. For 28 years, I was a journalist with the BBC, mainly with the BBC World Service. My very first job with the BBC was in a part called the Monitoring Service, where I monitored foreign radio broadcasts, initially from a huge old Downton Abbey type stately home outside Reading. And I monitored Radio Moscow in English, including Radio in Moscow in English to Africa. And I monitored Radio RSA, the external arm of SABC during the apartheid era. And that was from 1980 through until 1983. And part of that time I monitored from Malawi so that we could get a better signal from there. I then moved on a few years later to the main World Service, where I worked in the African service for a while, alongside some really exceptional African journalists, people like Joseph Wirungu, Elizabeth Ahini, Josephine Casely-Hayford, Ben Malor, lots of them. And I learned a huge amount from them, which was very important, because one of the big problems with framing news about South Africa and in a wider context, Africa in Britain, is people are not, journalists are not necessarily plugged in to the people, the areas they're reporting on. They have an understanding, even if they have traveled, say, in South Africa or Kenya or Tanzania or Nigeria or Ghana, they still tend to have a fairly static view of African realities and of the extremely diverse nature of Africa. And that's something they miss, I think, a lot of them. So at the World Service, working in the African service, and then in the English language service of World Service News, where our biggest single audience was in Nigeria, and very big audiences in the rest of English-speaking West Africa, East Africa, and down into Southern Africa. You know, I gained this insight that when you are broadcasting about the continent, firstly, it is so diverse. I don't know if any of you have come across it. It's worth looking at because it's quite a in some ways, an amusing website called Africa is a Country. And the name is deliberately cynical, satirical, in order to bring across the point that Africa is actually many, many countries. It is not one country. You could not, for example, say Europe is a country. It is made up of many different countries, cultures, linguistic groups, the same in Africa. So I learned a lot. I was lucky enough because I'd been out and monitored in Africa. I then took lots of trips of my own, particularly to East and Southern Africa, though until 1990, I was very, very much not wanted in South Africa by the National Party government. Because, and I make no apologies for this, in fact, it's something I'm still extremely proud of, as well as working for the BBC, until I was directly broadcasting for the BBC under my own name, I was able to write on a monthly basis and be on the editorial board of Anti-Apartheid News, the newspaper of the British anti-apartheid movement. So I had that to my bow as well, and through that, in London, in Tanzania, in Zambia, South Africans who were opposed to apartheid. I interviewed Thabo and Becky several times in exile. I hope you're hearing me, because I've just got a message up on my screen saying my internet connection is unstable. So do shout out if I suddenly disappear. And I met many other very important, brave South Africans. I will now move on, rather than talking about me all the time, to talking about framing and how I see framing coming from that background. Framing, and I'm sure in public relations you come across this. How are you going to frame a product, a company, an event? So what are you going to describe about it? In journalism, when you are approaching a news story or writing a feature, whether for radio, TV, online, something that's going to go out on social media, or the old traditional way, newspapers, you are thinking of a frame. It is like a picture frame. What is going within the frame of my story? What am I going to select as important? What am I going to exclude as unimportant? Then within the story, there is another aspect, and that is representation. How are you going to represent issues, countries, people, movements within your story? And that is very, very important. And one I think of the really big problems in the way that stories about South Africa and Africa are framed is that too many journalists have inherited, and I have to say, throwback inheritances to colonialism and to events in the immediate post-colonial period. There's a very good journalist that I know. He now lives in Cape Town. He's a British journalist. His name is Tim Butcher, and he was the defence correspondent and then the Africa correspondent of the Daily Telegraph newspaper. And he told me, and he put it in a book that he published on a journey he took through the Democratic Republic of Congo. He said when he first became Africa correspondent at the Daily Telegraph, an old hack being a name for a journalist, it's a name I take on myself. My Twitter handle is KS Africa Hack. I don't mind being called a hack. I think it's quite amusing. He said an old hack, an old journalist at the Telegraph said, when you go out to Africa, remember there are only two things we want to know: how many dead and what tribe. And that sums up two of the basic frames stereotypical frames that are used to look at events in African countries, events in the continent as a whole, certainly events in South Africa. What tribe do people belong to? And you may well disagree with me. Please do, if you get the chance to ask me questions. You may well disagree with me about the importance of tribe. I find tribe a very questionable description, and it's one I think when applied to Africa by European, North American journalists has so much baggage with it that even if you believe it can be used in other circumstances as a description of identity, as a frame in the media, it has so much baggage that I just don't think it should be used. And that baggage is that it is generally used to imply something primitive, something potentially violent, something to the European, North American psyche, something that is gone, is that they have got beyond, but that in Africa, parts of West Asia, South Asia, people haven't got beyond. And I'll give a couple of examples of why I think this is the case. In 2007, 2008, there was violence in Kenya after elections. The violence was because supporters of the opposition movement, led by the man who now may be Kenya's next president, Raila Odinga, came onto the streets to protest against the incumbent president and his party stealing the election by faking votes to inflate the size of their vote and say we have been elected back in. This was a political struggle between rival political movements. And yes, they had power bases among particular communities in Kenya, but they weren't protesting. The ODM were not protesting against Mwai Kibaki, the president, as a Kikuyu, or some of his supporters as Kikuyu. They were protesting against the theft of the election. Yet in the British media, this was presented, and I have to say, I was most disappointed because the person who used this expression on the BBC was somebody who'd been one of my editors when I was a young producer on news programs. She is somebody I respected hugely, and somebody who was one of the real experts on the Soviet Union and then post-Soviet Russia. And I would love to hear what she has to say about Ukraine. But she was, as we called it, the duty dog in news gathering as the foreign affairs correspondent based in London when the violence started. And she described it as primeval tribal bloodshed, the worst bloodshed we've seen for years in Africa. Not in Kenya, in Africa. It had to be Africa because you widen it out to get the frame of Africa. Now, 10 years before, in fact, more than 10 years before, you had the war in Bosnia, the war in Croatia, related to the breakup of Yugoslavia. Did they talk of tribalism? No. They talked of rival nationalisms, Serb nationalism, Bosnian nationalism, Croatian nationalism. This wasn't tribalism, this was nationalism. This was stepping beyond, this was more modern, this was talking about nations. And I actually believe you should use the word nation or community and not tribe. And that brings me on to the stereotypical frames that are used about Africa. Corruption, as though there is not corruption anywhere else in the world. In Britain, and the COVID crisis has really brought this out, we are living under the most corrupt government I can remember. I know there's the expression in South Africa, tenderpreneurship, that people who are linked to members of the ANC will get preferential treatment in being awarded tenders, being awarded government contracts. And this may be corrupt. Money may pass hands. Happens in Britain as well. And yet the corruption frame is used widely. The crime frame, particularly relating to South Africa. Now, I've been to South Africa, I think about a dozen times since 1990, when I was allowed in as a BBC journalist and they couldn't keep me out despite my anti-apartheid background. 12 times. In those 12 times, I've never been threatened. I've never been robbed. I've never really felt unsafe. Now, I know crime is a serious problem. Violent crime is a serious problem, but it is not the only aspect of South Africa. And yet the crime frame comes up, even in stories which may be about a crime, but are not about the wider issue of crime. You get this reference to the frame. So I can remember when the para athlete Oscar Pistorius shot and killed his partner, was tried and put in prison. It was the sort of appalling domestic violence that happens across the world. And yet, in British media reporting, it was reported as something almost purely South African. It fell into the crime frame, which in my view, it didn't. It was a crime that fell into a global domestic violence problem frame. You then get the disease frame or the famine frame. And with the disease frame, something that jumped out at me recently was when South African medical scientists isolated the Omicron variant, they were doing something that should have been highlighted as a success. Instead, you saw in British newspapers and the Daily Mail, which is possibly the most stereotypical, racist, sexist, appalling publication there is in Britain. I wouldn't use it to line the litter tray that my cat craps in, because it might offend the cat. They had this story saying super vaccine resistant Omicron virus runs wild in Botswana and is going to sweep across South Africa in a way you've never seen. Suddenly, COVID was fitted into a wider Africa is the continent of disease. Botswana is now breeding this super mutant. It will sweep across South Africa. But when you look at the figures, it's not right. Britain's daily COVID rate was vastly above rates almost anywhere in Africa, certainly in South Africa and Botswana, and the death rates have been huge. And yet in Britain, this is the pandemic. In South Africa, Southern Africa, other parts of Africa, it is African disease. And I see I've only got a minute left. The other disease frame example was related to the Beninois singer Angelique Kidjo, who in 2014 was leading a concert in honor of your great singer, Miriam Makeba, known as Mama Africa in Europe. People started putting on social media, this concert should not be called Mama Africa, it should be called Mama Ebola. And so I can see Tebogo there waiting for me to shut up. I can talk until your ears bleed, so I'll make sure I do shut up. You get these stereotypical frames, and the job of people in South Africa, in the PR industry, and in politics in South Africa, you've got problems to overcome in politics, but you need to really concentrate on successes and get successes, like isolating Omicron was a success. There are many other things that I could say about South Africa. I mean, even you have political problems. There is still violence, but look where you were in 1990 and look at the problems. I mean, we are still facing the possible breakup of the United Kingdom in what the newspapers should be calling Scottish tribal separatism, but it's not, it's Scottish nationalism. And on that note, I will end. And if there is time for questions, I'm very, very happy to answer anything you want to throw at me.
Wow, that was very, very. Oh. Wow, Professor Summerville, thank you so much for that presentation. I actually wasn't trying to get you to stop. I was just enjoying the framing. And I wanted to thank you for taking your time, for coming at the last minute, because I just asked you very recently on Twitter to come and join us. And I think it's refreshing to see someone who is based in Europe looking at Africa as it should, you know, seeing issues as they should be seen. And as you spoke about crime, I was walking the other day and I was just thinking, you know, we report a lot about the crime and maybe we do not report about the peace because it's not as dramatic and it can't be sensationalized. But maybe we need to, as Petunia has said in the comment section, we need to have a counter frame of Africa. When you frame us as the continent of disease, perhaps we should say, well, we have isolated the Omicron variant so that we can tackle it, so that we can recognize it and tackle it. You know, and I think without you know, not ignoring our challenges and trying to downplay some of the difficulties that we do have, but it shouldn't be a biased approach where we only focus on the difficulties and we try to frame it in a way that suits the stereotype. So I'd like to thank you so much for your contribution. It was very inspiring. The audience here loved it. It's just unfortunate we couldn't show everyone, but we will now go to any questions we have on the floor or online for Professor Keith Summerville. We'd really appreciate if you could provide any of those questions about framing articles in the African context or stories in the African context. You can raise your hand if you're online or anyone in the room.
While we wait, I'll just reply to Petunia. Yes, you need to get counterframes, as you said, Tebogo. You need to, there's an old song, accentuate the positive. And also another point, which following on from what you said, and that is there is a thing in journalism, not just about South Africa or Africa, but everywhere, an old expression which is sadly still true: if it bleeds, it leads. In other words, violence will lead, whereas solutions to violence don't necessarily lead. The only ones I can think that didn't lead in that way was the period immediately after the 1994 elections, which I had the pleasure to report on directly from South Africa, where the world saw Madiba's approach to reconciliation, and this became the story. Sadly, good news stories or optimistic stories, they disappear like smoke in the wind, and the bleeding leading comes back.
And I think maybe they're playing on our bias towards fear as human beings and trying to play on that to catch people's interest. And I think I just wanted to thank you for the last time and just say the insights that you've provided are very useful for us, because we can now look at how stories are framed about Africa. Think about how can we challenge those, and also think about how we can reframe, because in as much as all over the world we have challenges, but we also have great stories to tell. And if we look at it in the context of public relations and marketing, what is the role of public relations and marketing? They play a role in growing sustainable businesses. Your marketing is what brings you to your audience. And so if your entire continent is being marketed poorly, then it speaks about your ability to grow internationally competitive companies, and just the relationships that you'd have internationally may be framed with that particular stereotype. So it's very damaging. So Professor Summerville, thank you so much.
Can I just answer the question
Yes.
from Mandisa?
Yes.
Very good one, because actually I know Prince Harry. I've met him. I liked him. He did a lot of good work. I met him because sadly my son broke his neck playing rugby when he was 16 and is paralyzed from the chest down and will never walk again. He has to use a wheelchair. Prince Harry was, I think he's now had it taken away from him, the patron of the Injured Rugby Players Foundation that supported injured rugby players. And we met him at an event at a rugby match. And he was there was no, you've got to treat me as a royal, you've got to bow and scrape before me. He was a decent man who talked to us, you know, just as though he was just another member of the rugby community. There's that. I think he was not surprisingly unbelievably affected by the death of his mother, who I also knew because I knew her through her work on landmines and campaigns to lift landmines. During the 1995 Rugby World Cup, I was in Angola going out with landmine clearance teams to make a program about that and about the horror of landmines. So I met her. She was a troubled person, and I think Harry in his way is troubled, but there is always this thing about the royal family in Britain. They are supposedly refer to themselves as the firm, as though they're in a corporate identity, and the firm's image and position is everything. And if somebody steps out of line, as Harry has done, and criticizes the royal family and criticizes the way things are done, he is cast out, and then most of the British media will follow that up. And of course, there is the racism about Meghan Markle. A lot of the articles when they were first engaged and then married, barely hidden stream of racism throughout. And you can compare it until it became obvious he was totally guilty with how easily Prince Andrew got away with his horrible behavior, his disgusting behavior. And yet Harry, who's trying to live his own life and still do things that are positive, is absolutely a target now for the British media.
Perfect. Professor, we have another question from the Vice President of PRISA, Puti Mutapo. Her name is Puti. She wants to ask, what is your view on the situation in Ukraine as it pertains to how Africans are being treated at the borders?
That is, again, a very good one, Puti. There are two things about the way the Ukraine is being reported. I have to say, thankfully, Channel 4 News in Britain has had several pieces on Ghanaian, Nigerian, and other African students who are studying in Ukraine, who've got to the Polish border, and the Poles, who in other ways have been very, very admirable, don't extend this to African and also Asians who are trapped in the Ukraine. They were taking Ukrainians, their fellow Europeans, and I've heard a Polish politician who was interviewed saying, this is so shocking because we're seeing this happening to blonde-haired, blue-eyed Europeans. And to resume my attack on the British royal family, Prince William last week visited a Ukrainian community centre and sympathized with Ukrainians, which is great. But he again said, this does not happen in Europe. We expect this sort of thing to happen in Africa and Asia. So there is a double standard. And when you look at the coverage of the appalling refugee crisis, and it is appalling. What Putin is doing is appalling. What is happening to Ukrainians is absolutely terrible. But when you look at the way that is reported, say to the way the conflict still going on in Tigray, in Ethiopia, is being reported, Ukrainians have names. They are interviewed. Tigrayans, Ethiopians are, and I apologize for using this expression, just a mass of more Africans in trouble, and they're in trouble because the continent is a basket case, which of course it isn't, but that is the way it is presented. And the plight of the foreign students in Ukraine is just underreported. I don't think I've seen anything on the BBC other than on the BBC's Online for Africa site about it. It's not getting in the newspapers. These are just, you know, more unfortunate foreigners. They're not Europeans like us. And that is one of these things. Cultural proximity is a very important thing, and cultural proximity easily melts into racism. So yes, the way this is being reported, their plight is underreported, but also the way the Ukrainian refugee situation is reported, that is the way you should report it. But then you don't report it like that for Africa and Asia. You didn't report it like that for refugee crisis in Africa. And people will praise Poland, but when did you hear people praise Tanzania, for example, when they took in Rwandan refugees, when they took in refugees from Uganda at times? You don't hear African countries praised. In the Middle East, you don't hear Jordan praised for taking in hundreds of thousands of Syrians. Yet Poland, when they take it in, and yes, they should be praised, except for keeping out the African students, they get praised. It's this constant double standard. Shit happens, if you pardon me, shit happens in Africa. It shouldn't happen in Europe.
Thank you very much, Prof. On that note, I just wanted to thank you once again. I can't thank you enough, Prof. The insights that you are providing are very eye-opening and enlightening. These are things that we're going to reflect on, but also I think it's our duty as people in the media industry in South Africa to play our part and to ensure that we change the frame. We should challenge the frame. We should educate the rest of the world about the real Africa. And I think this is a step in the right direction. Prof, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. It has been a real pleasure. And anytime, just call on me. If anyone has any questions, Tebogo has my email address. Email me questions and I will try and answer them for you. So I hope you all enjoy the rest of the day and stay well, all of you.
Thank you. Stay safe, Prof. We'll be in touch. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the end of our session. It actually went beyond, but I think it was worth it. And I just want to say thank you very much for attending. You are the light that's going to shine the future into our industry. Let's continue to get to know each other. Let's continue to have some food and some drinks. But beyond that, have a great day. And we wish you all the best from PRISA. Thank you very much. Take care.